All right. Hi, this is Morgan with the American SBCC. I'm here with Ashley Sutherland of Nurture and Thrive. She's a member of our Trusted Parenting Network. Ashley, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you. So, a little background. Ashley is a mom and child psychologist who spent over 15 years studying children's emotional development in the academic world. And on her website, Nurture and Thrive, she shares science backed tips and tools so you can thrive as a parent. And today we're going to be focusing on emotional suppression. Where does it come from? What's the science behind it? And what can you do as a parent to really reduce the suppression of emotions in your home and your family? So let's just dive right in. Could you just give us a little background on what emotional suppression is?
Yeah, so emotional suppression is when we try to hide from our emotions instead of expressing them. And it's become more of a default in our society and our culture, whether it was maybe from our own childhood or just from the cultural ideas that we have that maybe emotions are these kind of bad things and they should always be controlled, right? Or that emotions are illogical and we want to use our thinking brain, so we don't want to have these emotions, so we always kind of push them to the side. But what's interesting is that research has shown that when we have emotional suppression, it can lead to a whole host of outcomes for people, negative outcomes.
Yeah, and so like you mentioned, I think a lot of people might see controlling your emotions as a fair coping mechanism, maybe even a strength. So what are those negative outcomes? What are the impacts of suppressing your emotions?
So it's been linked to a lot of things. For children, we can see that emotional suppression is linked to more internal biological stress, even in the moment. So we can see that if they're in a stressful situation, in a research situation, and we're looking at things like their heartbeat interval or even some of their stress hormones, we can see that they look very calm on the outside, but on the inside, they're actually having a lot of stress.
Oh,
And
interesting.
yeah, what we can find in adults is when you have a lot of stress ongoing, it can lead to immune suppression, anxiety, mental health issues, those kinds of things. In kids, we see behavior problems, and as they get older, we can see anxiety and depression. Or even kind of on the opposite side of the spectrum, we can see them kind of acting out behaviorally or having anger dysregulation. So you might
Hmm.
not see it in the moment, but over time we see more emotional outburst or more withdrawal.
Yeah. So that's interesting that it's something so different is happening inside than what they're
Yes.
showing externally. Um,
Mhm.
what can parents or caregivers do to kind of, I guess, look past whatever it is that they're presenting to get into like what emotions they might be suppressing?
Yes, that's a really good question. And I think it starts with a mind shift that emotions aren't bad.
Hmm.
I like to think of emotions just as energy. Whether it's positive emotions that we typically think about, like happiness and joy and excitement, or it's the, quote unquote, negative emotions like anger, frustration, sadness. And we think about emotions as this energy, and it has a reason that it's there and it has a function. So it's not just these illogical things that we want to avoid or ignore. We can kind of accept them and we can learn from them. Just as one example, if you're feeling really frustrated about something, it might motivate you to try something again because it was really hard, or push through something and try something to solve it in a different way. So if you have way too much anger and frustration, then it's harder to do that. But if you kind of accept that, oh, this is really frustrating, I'm going to use that energy to really try something, try it again, do
Yeah.
something that's hard for me, but I'm going to do it again because I'm frustrated that it didn't go the way I thought the first time. So if we just kind of first shift our idea that emotions are something that need to be controlled with willpower, and
Mm.
instead think of something that we can learn to work with, then we're talking about emotion regulation, not emotional suppression.
Mm.
And that's where we found in the research really healthy outcomes for children and adults too. That if we learn to accept our emotions, identify them, name them, and that kind of thing. So, specifically, what a parent could do is we tend to say things like calm down, or
Mhm.
don't cry, because we're uncomfortable with this big emotional display that we're seeing, or because we want our kids to feel better. And so we're just like, don't cry, calm down, calm down. So we're not meaning to say, don't express
Yeah.
your emotions. But if instead we said something like, wow, it looks like this is feeling really hard, or you're having some big feelings, or you're feeling upset, you can start with just acknowledging that they're having some emotion.
Mhm.
And it's okay to feel angry, sad, whatever the thing is. You can start with that. And I think that that can be helpful because while over time kids might suppress emotions, if we're saying things like, um, you're okay, calm down, don't cry, we can see in the moment some kids will actually escalate the emotion
Mm.
because they're trying to communicate it. They have
Yeah.
all this big feeling inside. They don't, especially young kids, they don't know exactly what it is. They might not be thinking, oh, I'm angry. They just feel all of this. And when you say, don't cry, or you're okay, or calm down, they might escalate that and cry harder or throw a
Yeah.
bigger tantrum because they want to communicate. That's their first impulse, is to connect,
Yeah.
which is another function of emotion, is to foster our connections.
I'm thinking about the parents that might be tuning in now that have older kids, they're teenagers, maybe even older than that, and they're realizing that maybe that was how they handled emotions when their
Mhm.
kids were in their more formative years. And so now they have a teenager that is not it is definitely suppressing their emotions. So what would it look like for that parent to try to, really reconnect and maybe switch up the way that they're approaching it emotion?
That's a great question. I think that, when you get to adolescents and teenagers, a lot of times they will um, try to suppress emotions or say, go away, or, close their door, or not want to talk about it. And I think in those moments, it's okay to say, wow, it seems like you're having some really hard feelings. And you can say, I remember a time when I felt like this, or you could try to relate somehow. And then you can ask them, do you want a little bit of space?
Mhm.
Do you want some comfort? And I think sometimes when adolescents are pushing away is the time that you say, it's okay to have all the feelings that you're feeling. And I can just sit next to you. You don't have to say anything. But, uh, you know, I think that it's okay to give them space. And it's also okay to say, I will stay with you while you have these hard feelings, and just sit there with them.
Yeah, I think that's, like, the hardest thing as a parent not to just not say something because
Yeah.
you just wanna say, like you're like, "I just wanna say the right thing."
Hmm.
So the idea that sometimes the right thing is just, like, your presence is
Hmm.
definitely doesn't come natural for me.
Right. Well, I mean, it is something you do have to be kind of conscious about and thinking about, because we do feel uncomfortability with big emotions. It's
Yeah.
just part of our whole society and our culture. Um, but I think that it's the idea of you kind of hold this space for emotions, and that you're saying to your child, you don't have to be alone in this hard moment. And when you're feeling emotional, when you're feeling at your worst, it doesn't scare me away. Like,
Mm.
I can be here with you. And I mean, even if this was something that you didn't do with your child when they were young, you can start anytime. Um, and for some kids, it might be talking about the fact that, I know that we didn't do this a lot when you were young, and now I've kind of learned that it's really important to sit with emotions and accept emotions.
Yeah.
And so I want to try to start doing that. How does that sound to you? And just open it up as a conversation. it's not something that you do once and miraculously your teen opens up.
Right, of
But
course.
you'd be surprised, how just sitting there and not trying to change it or fix it or do anything with it, that they will open up to you.
I think also like just leading by example of saying of like, I learned something new and now I'm gonna change my mind about something is very, very powerful, a great model to
Mm-hmm.
have. I also want to get back to something you mentioned about, behavior versus, the source, that we lean more towards wanting to like control behavior, versus maybe understanding where it's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
So what would be like your number one tip to parents, that are trying to, welcome emotions, but
Mm-hmm.
are having a hard time with like the way they're being displayed?
Yeah. And I mean, that's a great question. And kids don't know how to express their emotions smoothly, in socially appropriate ways right at the beginning. I mean, most of us as adults don't always know the best way to express our emotions either. And a lot of times people will say, well, if we're just accepting all these emotions, we're letting our kids act up in all these ways. And
Mhm,
that's a big misconception. You can put a
mhm.
limit on the behavior and still accept the emotion. So if your toddler
Yeah,
is
what does that look like?
yeah.
I'm like
So here's
dying
an
to
yeah.
know.
A toddler is upset because, another child took the toy that they were playing with, so they push.
Mhm,
And so you can, go over, stop the pushing behavior immediately because that's not okay. And then you can say, I can see you're really upset because the toy was grabbed away from you. It's okay to feel upset that the toy was grabbed away, you know? And then but it's not okay to push. So you have the limit on the behavior. It's okay to be upset. And then maybe we can take turns with it and kind of help them manage the taking turns.
mhm,
So they learn that there's other ways to work through something. And sometimes it will take a little bit more than just saying it's okay to be upset for them to work through the feeling. And sometimes that might be, let's go sit on this bench over here. Let's take a break from the playground. Let's calm down a little bit after you've already said it's okay to feel upset. You can move through kind of feeling better before you put them back out in that
yeah,
situation. But I think the behaviors that we see a lot of times are just immature expressions of frustration, sadness, stress, anxiety, whatever it might be. And so, what I say is, you think about it like an iceberg.
mhm,
So, all the things you see above the water is like the meltdowns, the behaviors, the outbursts, the tantrums, all that stuff. The teenager slamming the door, saying, leave me alone, all of that is what you see up here. But then underneath the water, that's all of the emotional needs for connection and understanding that we don't necessarily see at the surface. So, what I say is just think about emotions and behavior as being two separate things. So,
good.
how can you accept what they might be feeling while at the same time helping them problem solve behaviorally or even putting limits on the behavior? So, that's kind of a way to think about it.
That's good, that's good. And then, for parents that probably were not raised in a way that was welcoming emotions and maybe are figuring this out for themselves as well, what does it look like to not suppress their emotions? What can they do for themselves?
And I think this is almost where you even begin.
Yeah.
Because I think as parents, we tend to kind of use our inner voice to yell at ourselves a lot. And we expect ourselves to be these kind of, parents that always know what to do, or that we're always calm, or if we're not feeling calm, then we're somehow doing something wrong. And I think you have to start with the acceptance of what you're feeling. And that just starts with noticing and kind of admitting it to yourself. And again, you yourself, you don't have to have a behavioral response. So if you're trying to stop yelling at your kids because your impulse is to yell when you get stressed, you can first stop and notice that, wow, when my child's having a tantrum, I'm feeling a lot of anxiety and stress inside. And then just tell yourself to be okay with that. Instead of telling yourself to be calm, or you're a bad parent because you're stressed by the tantrum, or you can't handle anything because you feel stressed by the tantrum. It's okay to feel stressed when your kid's having a tantrum and a
Yeah.
meltdown. That's okay. I mean, I think if we were all honest with each other, we would say, yeah, that's pretty stressful. We're
Mhm.
not just kind of floating along like, oh yeah, it's a lot when your kids, or if your teenager is, having a hard time and slamming the door.
Mhm.
Um, I think all of that is times where we can just say, okay, yeah, this is a stressful situation. I'm feeling stressed, and take a couple deep breaths ourselves. And then move on and try to help your child. But you could always come back and revisit that yourself with the stress.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this was great, super helpful, a lot of really tangible things that I think that caregivers can apply immediately, or
Mhm.
one at a time, however works for them. So Ashley, thank you so much for your time
Thank
and for
you.
being with us and for your
Yeah.
partnership with the Trusted Parenting Network.
Okay. Thank you so much.